So is World War III going to play out more like World War I or World War II?
Now, World War III hasn't happened yet.
Thank goodness.
It could take different forms.
This is a crazy map already starting off. This is the current occupied parts of Ukraine by Russia.
For brevity, this video will assume just one scenario. If it's to truly be a world war, by definition, it can't be just China versus US.
By definition, that is right. We need at least a couple of continents to be involved. I mean, minus like 2 or 3.
Or just Russia versus NATO. Even more so because Russia could not survive against NATO without resorting to nukes. It's having trouble winning over just Ukraine with limited NATO support. So we will define the next world war as a war where China and Russia are fighting the entire NATO and a few more Pacific allies.
I think that's safe to say. If it needs to be a true World War III, it needs to be Russia and China at least versus NATO and a couple of Pacific allies.
When most people
so probably Japan, South Korea, maybe Taiwan
think of world wars, they think of World War II. Indeed, there haven't really been many world wars, and the second one was bigger, deadlier, and has remained fresh in people's memories.
Absolutely.
But if one would ask which of the two wars was an outlier, an exception to the rule of how wars go, think of things that World War I would also be a suitable comparison.
Especially because it was this weird blend of technology where, like, obviously we were getting closer and closer to the way, like, modern wars work, but we were still using, like, 19th century technology at the very same time, and there was a bunch of experimental stuff going on at the same time.
This video will also show how and why some aspects of World War II, the Gulf War, and such wars were an aberration. It will show that certain battles remain fixed in people's memories, distorting the view of the entire war. Ultimately, the video will show which aspects of the next World War will be closer to World War II and which are more likely to resemble the slow crawl of World War I.
And this is a very interesting question to ask right now, considering everyone that's studying the Ukraine-Russian war right now. It is very similar to the way World War I took place. It's very slow. It is extremely slow. They're fighting in trenches again. I mean, it's extremely like World War I, and there's always... It kind of all depends. There's certain conflicts in the last 100 years that have played out more like World War I. For example, the Iran-Iranian War back in the 1980s. Iraq-Iranian War, I mean. Iran-Iranian, what the heck was I saying? By the way, if you want some plushies, there's some plushies behind me. You can get those, and they can be in your presence, also behind you in a creepy way, by head over to makeshift.com. That link is down below. Oh, what the...
World War I had battles where hundreds of thousands of troops fought in fairly small areas of a few dozen kilometers across. To move the front, you needed untold supplies to support all those forces. Even if there was next to no enemy in front of you, the movement was still slow. The initial fastest phase of the war had Germany advance roughly a dozen kilometers per day through...
I feel like I know how this video is going to go. So, in a World War III scenario, Europe, the European front, is going to play out probably, as of right now, it might play out more like World War I. However, that Pacific front, the front where it's the US and her allies like Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan versus China, that's probably going to play out more like World War II. But let's go ahead and see.
Belgium, with fairly little resistance involved. World War II introduced motorized warfare and tank usage on a much larger scale. Personnel carrier vehicles and a massively bigger motor pool of various trucks were present to haul around supplies. All that enabled some fairly quick dashes.
That was the biggest difference, obviously, between World War I and World War II, is the speed of war, the Blitzkrieg. That is why Germany was able to get so big in Europe, because everyone was still thinking that war was going to be fought in a similar way that World War I was fought in, with trenches and slow moving. And all of a sudden, Germany comes out with these new military technologies, this new military doctrine, and they're literally taking over hundreds and hundreds of miles in lightning speed.
In World War II, there were examples where a very large force would move over 50 kilometers per day behind enemy lines, once the initial front line was broken. One example would be the German 1941 rush to encircle Minsk, where Germans reached the northeast Minsk in just 5 days, having crossed over 300 kilometers.
That's crazy.
So the motorization certainly helped there, enabling a few times faster movement. But without logistics maintaining pace, without scouting ahead,
Bro got an accordion, that was crazy. He's just like blasting the accordion on top of this.
Without logistics maintaining pace, without
Yo, I want more war aura stuff like this. I need war air aura stuff on top of tanks with accordions. That's crazy.
Scouting ahead,
I want that job.
Wouldn't have been possible.
I'd be giving that
Radio
guy flowers
and
too.
communication enabled all that, and also helped Germany achieve initial success during Operation Barbarossa.
I think the only way like another lightning war, things like change that fast, where like we're speedily taking over territories, like you have to have a new technology that other people have, or you have to have a new strategy that's employing a new technology that other people don't have. And currently, I don't see what that could be. I'm sure he's going to get into it, but World War III, what's the biggest new technology that's going to change the way World War III works versus the previous two wars? That's drone warfare, and probably more automation in general, robotics and things like that.
Those swift conquests taking huge areas quickly, it was due to differences in applied technology, like radio. Germany used it a lot, but Soviets could not utilize it as much on the tactical level. It was also due to surprise, as Stalin did not believe the attack would come. It was also due to experience. The entire German
I thought Stalin knew that the attack was going to come, or figured it would eventually come. He just probably wasn't predicting it at that very exact moment.
army had 2 years of war experience. The Soviets had less on such a scale. In World War III, there would be far less surprise, both politically as the Cold War is upon us, and due to technology.
I wish we would. Okay, I know we're covering the European front first, so maybe we'll leave it alone. But I wish that we would cover like some obvious blue allies. That'd be Australia, New Zealand. Like I keep saying, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, probably the Philippines. I wish we could also draw in some more red countries because, okay, ultimately, for it to be a world war, we just need Russia and China. But it would probably not just be Russia and China. It would be North Korea too. It would be Iran as well, at the very least.
Both politically as the Cold War is upon us, and due to technology, as large formations simply can't be hidden anymore while they're being assembled. While China has the least actual war experience, Russia has the most. US troops of the 2000s had most experience, but by today that has somewhat dissipated.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. We do not have the experience, the training, if you will, in a lot of strategy games. You have to send troops out in order for them to gain experience, to gain promotions, for example. We had a lot more of that back in the early 2000s when we were sending U.S. troops into Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, that's not to say that we should be gaining experience by going to war. Trump, don't invade Venezuela. But that is an interesting point, that we are definitely losing the experience. Whereas like Russia they're already in the war economy. They've already turned their economy into a war economy. They've been at war for 3 years. They've definitely gained more experience.
Other NATO and allied troops haven't seen combat much either.
Geez, when's the last time NATO troops saw combat? Or I guess NATO troops, oh damn. I don't know, I guess it depends, but it's been a long time.
Except Ukrainian ones. In World War III,
they're obviously watching very closely the Ukrainian conflict, though.
Technology used would be similar on both sides. That's unlike in World War II, where one side with a much more developed economy could leverage the tech advantage like recon and sensing platforms over its opponent. In World War I, the difference in technology between belligerents was generally similar. Rifles and machine guns used everywhere were similar on both sides.
Interesting.
Artillery guns were similar.
So yeah, I think he's getting at the point that we made earlier, is that the European front of World War III is going to play out like World War I, because everyone's on a level playing field in terms of technology and resources. Resources actually a little bit differently, but technology and stuff.
Planes were similar. It can be argued that the difference in technology levels between two belligerents was smaller in World War I than it was in World War II.
I could see that.
One big difference was the usage of tanks, where the Allies had thousands of tanks, while Germany had almost no tanks. But tanks came to be dominant only in the late stage of the war. Though no tank...
Yeah, we were still heavily reliant on cavalry.
This was also an industrial problem for Germany, not just technological one. That applied technology difference sort of ties into the difference in production volumes. Tanks were an extreme example, but the Allies were ahead in aircraft produced as well. Germany and Austria-Hungary made 1/3 of the Allied plane count.
Yeah, that industrial infrastructure just wasn't really there all over the place in World War I. Obviously, it would be there for World War II. Some countries had to play catch-up, obviously, but
the aircraft themselves weren't as important in World War I, so the difference wasn't as important either. Artillery shell usage is another metric. Even though ultimately artillery did not prove as decisive for breakthroughs, It still shows
Yeah, everyone talks about these artillery shells. There were more artillery shells produced in a singular day during World War I or World War II than there are artillery shells produced in a singular year nowadays. Something like that, some crazy statistics like that.
Made fewer than half the shell totals of the Allies. Finally, let us look at troop numbers of World War I. Central powers had mobilized roughly half the Allied troop numbers. The US figures are not added so they don't distort the picture too much,
because the US didn't join until 1917.
The US presence wasn't really felt much before 1918.
Oh, there you
go. Even Russia here distorts the total, with its 12 million mobilized and unusually high 9 million casualties. Imperial Russia performed badly in World War I and ultimately dropped out of the war. As Germany then relocated its troops towards the west, it wasn't until mid-1918 when the US numbers really started to get felt, and when Germany was in big industrial and mobilization problems, that the German line started cracking. To sum up World War I, one side had double the troops, more than double the artillery shells, 3 times the aircraft, and in late war, a massive advantage in armored vehicles. And that side won. But only after...
Big surprise there, that's crazy.
4 years of a slog of a war, with the front lines in the west moving very, very slowly. Another crucial advantage the winner enjoyed was the economic blockade of its opponent, Germany. Being landlocked and blocked by the Royal Navy and Italian Navy, the losing side...
Germany's not really a big naval power. Obviously, Germany's a big army power, land power, I guess. And that makes sense, especially because Germany's typically facing mostly land powers. Russia is the same way. Russia is a land power. They're not a big naval power. China will be a big kind of difference maker. China's going to be the closest, obviously the second place nation with the biggest fleet in a World War III scenario like this. But they still have a long way to go before catching the U.S. and our allies and our fleet power.
Also lost due to lack of resources. One might argue that had Germany had full access to natural resources, it could have lasted for a year or two longer.
Russia and China will have access to plenty of natural resources, that's for sure. Russia and China are very, very big countries.
World War II figures show that the Second War was largely a continuation of the first one, though there are differences.
Yeah, I mean, it's called the interwar period for a reason. I mean, it kind of feels like it's directly connected. It's like a brief delay in the conflict. World War I happens. We call the time in between World War I and World War II the interwar period. It literally sounds like everyone's just like, hey, we'll fight again in like 20 years. All right, see you here, same time, same place. All right, see you then.
US figures include 1940, as the US was sending large numbers of hardware to its allies, even before it entered the war. Allies made some 5 times more heavy armored vehicles than the Axis. In artillery and mortars, the difference was even more lopsided, considering the Axis were especially focused on mortars. Artillery-wise, the difference was 10 to 1. In aircraft, the Allies again outproduced the Axis 3 to 1. In terms of naval output,
yeah, I mean, that's really, they are really helped by the U.S. right here. I mean, just look at the U.S. numbers. It's actually crazy. Like, the Axis would have been, well, slightly on par, but Italy's really not doing that much. They were almost on par, but it's really the U.S. that just, like, completely jacked the numbers up for the Allies.
It was far, far worse still. Enough so that Germany and Japan were strangled economically due to naval blockades, starved of resources during the war despite their advantage in submarines. Finally, when it comes to troops mobilized during the war, it's visible World War II was similar to World War I. Again,
this is an interesting way to look at it from like a top-down perspective, both these world wars, just purely world wars by the numbers. That's what we're doing here.
And the Allies were roughly 2 times more numerous.
It's a tough one because, I mean, obviously what's really, you got China and the Soviets that are overwhelmingly putting it towards the Axis side. But, yeah, I mean, there was a clear... See, here's the thing. With both world wars, there's an emerging power trying to take out the already prominent #1 power. So naturally speaking, that side, that emerging power is just not... They're going to be the underdogs, typically, in terms of all of these categories, because they're still emerging. They're trying to surpass the #1 power. Could we see that play out again in World War III? Because China, obviously, is the emerging power trying to pass up the number one power, the USA.
Here, China is included in the fight as they tied up quite a bit of Japanese ground forces, even though China was poorly equipped.
Yeah,
but
you have to put China here. I mean, I guess you don't have to. Even without China, the Allies still have a pretty significant troops mobilized advantage, mainly because of the Soviets, obviously.
Even with earlier figures, we saw the Second War was much of a repeat of the first. The side that lost was low on resources as the war dragged on. Low on oil, metals, chemicals, and so on. It was low on hardware like tanks and planes and far lower on guns compared to World War I. Ultimately, it was also behind on manpower. World War III is likely to lower the gap in troop numbers between two belligerents, from roughly 2-1 to 1.5-1.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about fighting the second most populous nation on Earth, China. Russia's not providing, Russia's going to provide a bit of mobilization, but Russia's been taking some hits for the last 3 years. And also, remember, Russia's not the most populous country ever. What are they ranked, actually? Because they're only at like 140-ish million, so they're like hovering around the top 10 or less countries with most population.
With the Western Allied side being the side with fewer troops, eventually. Just imagine what it took to do the Normandy landings in World War II. What the US was considering for invading Japan before it gave up on that idea. It rather used nukes. Given China's size...
Oh, yeah, I can't imagine. Yeah, without those nukes, that would have been disastrous for everyone, obviously, involved. And then who knows what the results are for Japan. I mean, maybe Japan just becomes a communist country. Because I think only the Soviets were going to be crazy enough to maybe sacrifice the troops to invade Japanese mainlands.
There is virtually no chance of the US and its allies assembling enough force to land in China and take its home territory.
I like the way that was put. There's virtually no chance. I agree. The scenarios where I see, U.S. and her allies invading Chinese mainland, I'm already just like, bro, stop. This is absolute insanity. There's just no way. That's insane.
So China could afford to send most of its land power to Western Russia if needed.
Ooh, that's a very good point. The Chinese fleet would obviously stay behind, or maybe the fleet would come over there and try to break some stuff up, break some NATO blockades of Western Russia.
Depending on the
But yeah, those Chinese troops could flood over.
Political winds in Europe. If that happens, the combined land might of Europe and the US may be short on manpower. They might find themselves outnumbered over time as the war progresses into mass mobilization. One side would have a visible close to 2 times bigger advantage in the number of combat planes.
Wow.
But said advantage is 2-1, not the 3-1 advantage.
So in this scenario, we're just completely Xing out like any chance of there's no land warfare. I agree, though. There would be like no land warfare in the Pacific. So we're just kind of removing all that. China's just going to go full on, send most of their army to Western Russia to fight European troops over that way. And meanwhile, there might be like small skirmishes like the Pacific Theater in World War II. There probably would be tons of naval battles happening in the Pacific Ocean. But yeah, they could probably send the vast majority of their army itself into Ukraine.
Of previous world wars. It's very likely production of new planes would ramp up more quickly in NATO and Allies' favor for at least several years, despite China's numerous industries.
That's this guy. Okay, so we're giving the Allies the advantage. But yeah, that's a little scary. China's got all of the industry right now. That is kind of the thing that Trump has been talking about, leading the U.S. recently. It's like we have no industry. We're not producing anything in the U.S. And that could obviously be a massive problem in a World War III scenario.
However, it's also plausible NATO would be far behind in production of SAM systems. Air power has massively changed warfare. In World War I, airplanes were still mostly there for scouting and to deny recon to the other side. Bombing raids were limited compared to what went on in World War II. Today, on one hand, radars and sensors are better than ever. Non-stealthy planes are at a significant disadvantage. But stealthy planes are proliferating greatly, causing the radar networks to detect them later, and sometimes even not at all.
Yeah, look at the B-2 bombers. Look at what happened with the U.S. and Iran, and the U.S. just blowing up the 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. We don't know if China has the technology to detect B-2 attacks like that. I mean, you got to kind of give China slightly more of an advantage than Iran has, right? But the reports are saying that China's a little freaked out. China and Russia were freaked out that we were able to secretly do that without any detection whatsoever. I guess it depends. I mean, it's a matter of time. It's all a race, right? So eventually China will get the technology more than likely to detect those, flying B-2 bombers. But it all depends on when that were to occur. I feel like, we should make a mention of like there would be a Pacific Fleet of World War III, and there'd be a lot of attacks happening and fighting happening in the oceans during World War III, but there would probably also be a ton of air raids. There'd be a ton of aerial battles happening in the Pacific, whether it's bombing raids against China or China going and bombing South Korea and Japan or Taiwan.
And standoff weapons are involved. In World War II, a plane had to overfly a target. Today, especially seen in Ukraine, the norm has become to release weapons from dozens to hundreds of miles away. Technology has enabled those bombs and missiles to still hit targets, even from such...
Wow, look at the percentages, how much better it occurred over the course of just 2 years. That's crazy.
Distances. In World War II, air defenses were largely hit and miss.
Oh, those are actually...
From such distances. In World War II...
We're actually talking from onward, more fighter planes than the Luftwaffe.
Defenses were large.
But I did see numbers talking about that, how percentages of targets being hit are... Well, obviously they're going to increase since World War II days. We're getting so much better at hitting targets. Well, we already talked about it. I mean, with the B-2 example of the U.S. bombing Iranian facilities.
Hit and miss. You could overcome them with sheer numbers. Come Vietnam, the U.S. air power found itself suffering some unsustainable bomber losses for a while, until it leveraged its technological and numerical superiority. More modern missiles in recent decades managed 50% kill.
Something important to remember, though, we are on the topic of air forces and things like that, but air does not win wars. That's what we learned from Vietnam. It can sometimes win wars, but you need at least something on the ground. You need something on the ground. In the case of Libya, for instance, in 2011, when we ousted Gaddafi, NATO and the U.S. provided the air support, but it was the air support for the rebels on the ground in Libya to dismantle the Gaddafi regime. So air is important, but you need something on the ground.
Rates. And today in Ukraine, Russia is basically afraid to go over the front lines in Ukraine, as then its aircraft losses would skyrocket. Modern SAM systems are simply too dangerous unless you can seriously outnumber them or beat them with superior technology. Neither seems likely for World War III. Today, the Red Team has nearly 2.5 times more land-based long-range SAM systems than Blue Team, NATO and allies, and approximately 4 times as many medium-range SAMs, ones with enough reach to close the airspace above them. Coupled with lethality of today's SAMs, compared to the flak air defenses of the yesteryear, the blue side reliance on air power would not be as pronounced in World War III. SAMs would partially blunt that edge. Allies would see some more success in the air, but their enemies' airbases, factories and ports would not nearly be bombed to the degree Germany's were in World War II. The air war would for the good part be fought over an invisible no-man's airspace buffer zone, not really venturing enough inside China or Russia. Allies would occasionally attempt deep strikes, but given the unsustainable losses those would produce, such strikes would not be regular. It would be near stalemate.
Well, that's the interesting thing here. Like, for instance, with World War II, how much technology changed over the course of just 6 years. Like, the technological race that would be occurring underneath while World War III was happening. Like, the longer World War III occurs for, the more technology is going to grow and it's going to, explode in different areas. And that's, the beginning of World War III would look nothing like the end of World War III. I think we can all feel confident in saying that at the very least.
In a way that may resemble more the air war of World War I, where air clashes were most
1080p quality? Come on, where's that at?
Air clashes were most often done fairly near the front line. Technology is only part of the reason there. Other part is geography. While long-range air raids in world wars were done over a few hundred miles, the distance from Germany to Britain and vice versa, in World War III those distances would increase substantially, and the depth of enemy territory that a plane would have to overfly would be a few times greater. giving...
I mean, yeah, I was going to say it depends on where they're launched from. Poland would have to be the air pad, the airstrip, essentially, of NATO and the Allies.
More
or the Baltic countries, if they were able to stand up and exist. You know, the Baltic countries are the most vulnerable position that obviously NATO has, because you have Russian Kaliningrad into Belarus, and then boom, you can kind of cut them off. I mean, it's safe to say we'll probably be able to protect the Baltic Sea for a while. I don't know how much the Chinese fleet is going to come over here and how much of an impact the Chinese fleet is going to have. I feel like overall the Allies are going to retain their naval supremacy, their naval superiority, more than likely. So maybe the Baltics would be okay even if they get cut off by land.
Opportunities to the defender to spot and shoot down a plane. Today, even stealthy bombers would be hard-pressed to fly for an hour inside enemy lands, while being observed by enemy radars from multiple angles.
Well, that's what they thought.
Standoff missiles would be used
but
a
we'll
lot.
See.
But compared to the number of targets, there are orders of magnitude too few such missiles available. Those won't make much of a dent. During the 3 years of the war...
Obviously, we're assuming that no one's using nukes, if that wasn't obvious enough. But yeah, we're assuming that no side is using nukes.
In Ukraine, Russia attacked Ukraine with some 7,000 precision missiles, of which 1/3 was intercepted by air defenses. To frankly a result that hasn't really been decisive. And the EU, US, China and Russia are far, far bigger countries with several dozen times more targets. If the war happens fairly soon, there wouldn't be enough missiles. During both world wars, Germany was basically at the Allies' doorstep. To hurt Russia, one first needs to take quite a bit of territory to even get most missiles in range. One thing that would likely be a repeat of World War II is Russia moving its industry more inland, making it harder to be reached.
If they aren't already, I mean, I'm sure they've done a little bit of that, especially if their number one ally is going to be China. Here's the thing, though. I mean, we don't want to dive down to this. We don't want to go down this rabbit hole too much, but Russia and China has had a very mixed past and history. These two, they are working together because they kind of have to right now, but there could be room here to cause some sort of divide between Russia and China. I mean, that's exactly what happened with the Sino-Soviet split. And you can go back further than that with the rivalry that Russia and China has had. That is one way to go about it, just to try to break them up, break up this alliance from the inside.
China may be more compact than Russia, but it has a sea buffer surrounding it, adding to its strategic depth. World War I was won on land, no question about that. World War II was won on land, but air power played a massive role in softening up the enemy. And in the Pacific, the Navy enabled both land and air power to approach the enemy. Today, large vehicle formations don't seem to be working. There were many reports from Ukraine saying that tanks aren't being used like they were used in previous wars.
Yeah, they can't. See, that's the thing, like, the economic aspect of War II, drones have changed everything, because it costs, like, what, $1,000, $3,000, maybe less, to produce, like, an explosive drone? That's so much cheaper than it is to, like, literally run anything else. How much is a tank? I looked up the cost of a tank. It's, like, at least $1 million. For me to buy, like, a brand new Abrams, it might be even more than that, $3-4 million, with not all the fancy stuff on top of it included.
Now they sit far back and are used as fire support. Whenever either side tries a mass vehicle rush, it ends up in a massacre. In World War II, open fields were conducive to large, fast-moving vehicle formations. Today, such assaults would end up in said formations getting killed, unless absolute air superiority is achieved first, which we showed is unlikely to happen.
Yeah, it's unlikely that either side gets absolute air superiority.
Today's sensors have simply gotten too numerous and too good. You can't assemble a large force and keep it a secret. You can't surprise your opponent with a large attack. And cheap defensive options like anti-tank guided missiles, remotely laid minefields, guided artillery rounds, and especially pilot-guided kamikaze drones mean that vehicles are simply not viable.
Wow.
It's no wonder that both sides in Ukraine reverted to small squads of soldiers on foot, often during nighttime, to try and make minimal gains.
Wow.
Or that Russia has often used electric noiseless motorbikes, again in small squads, to get from village to village.
That's so crazy. We're back to bicycle technology. It's crazy. No one can defeat the bicycle unit division.
In a way that's similar to specialized infiltration and trench assault units used in late World War I. People tend to forget there was a lot of trench warfare in World War II as well, especially the Eastern Front in 1942 and 1943, when large parts of the front did not meaningfully move for months, quite a bit resembling either World War I fronts or the front in Ukraine today. When it comes to the technology gap, the US is somewhat leading in cutting-edge stuff, but when it comes to numbers...
I mean, the thing is, we don't really know. That's probably a safe bet, but we don't know, because we don't know exactly what... everyone's producing things secretly. The Chinese are definitely doing that. We don't... Who knows what the U.S. military has under their, under their sleeve.
Of applied and fielded technological systems, the gap to China is almost non-existent. Europe is in many regards behind China when it comes to the number of actually fielded high-tech systems. Russia is behind Europe, in some regards similarly to how it was behind Germany in World War II. For example, Russian deep recon and surveillance assets are still not numerous enough, though it can be said that the Ukraine war has made Russia fairly capable when it comes to surveillance of the immediate front lines, by sheer number of small recon drones. But generally, Russia is behind in electronics and derived technologies. Generally,
I mean, when you rank it like that, he just said basically we got the. I mean, I guess we're specifically talking about technology, but we have the U.S. as the #1 power, China is the #2 power, Europe is the #3 power, and then Russia at 4. So that's 4 and 2 versus 3 and 1. I'll take those odds. That sounds like great odds.
Speaking, the technological gap of World War III belligerents seems to be somewhere in between the situation seen in 2 world wars. Again, not conducive to a quick war. Finally, what about resources and economic blockade? Famously, both world wars had Germany...
1918, Germany had average meat rations fall below by 88%.
And its allies severely strapped for resources. During World War I, Germany was especially starved of oil and food as the war went on.
This is my theory of why we have began to de-globalize all around the world. I mean, obviously COVID was the wake-up call, but part of it is just like, hey, things are getting kind of scary. I think a lot of sides, both sides, are thinking maybe a World War III actually could happen, which means we need to be able to produce all of our own stuff. We got to stop being so reliant on the global system. I mean, it made sense for, globalization when there was just one power. That was just the USA. Now there's several powers. Well, I mean, China is becoming the big new power, but now the whole global system doesn't make much sense because we've got 2 powers competing.
World War II, Germany was better prepared there, though eventually it too was largely out of fuel. Today, Russia is already heavily sanctioned and its economy turned inwards and towards China. China will not really be trading with the West either if it comes to war. China today is much more oriented to exporting various commercial products than Germany was in world wars. China's naval trade routes to neutral countries would be cut by Western navies, so a huge chunk of the world market will not be there for China anymore.
I mean, the navies would be a thing, but isn't this the whole... I mean, this is one of the points of the rebuilding of the Silk Road. China wants to, they can just trade through land. Obviously, it's not as nice as using a ship, in shipping routes. So obviously a blockade would be very bad for China, especially how, I don't say how easy it'd be to blockade China, but China only borders one ocean, one sea. Like it wouldn't be that, and all these are basically allies too. From Vietnam to the Philippines to Taiwan to South Korea to Japan, these are all allies. You have to worry about the North a little bit here, but yeah. But I guess China could always send their stuff to allies. That's how, an ally that we talked about earlier, Iran.
Before, the majority of the oil and iron was used to produce non-wartime products. Once the war starts and the market access narrows, China would find itself in a surplus of oil, chemicals and iron. That would be valid even without Russia, and with Russia in play, pretty much all natural...
Produced 23% of its oil consumption and 58% of its natural gas consumption. Satisfies 50% of oil consumption via domestic oil and land routes imports, and 64% of its gas consumption via domestic gas and land routes. Yeah, how much is Russia going to contribute to that?
Resources missing will be traded via plentiful land routes. Compared to previous world wars, there would be no one belligerent side strapped for resources. Both would have enough fuel, food, chemicals, steel and other stuff to last for years, if not a decade.
Dang.
In a way, World War II is a bit closer to the World War III situation, but only because World War I Germany was so strapped for resources. And then again, World War II Japan was low on everything due to the war and the US blockade, from oil, food to steel. But ultimately, if one wanted to compare World War II Germany and Japan to today's Russia and China, the latter two would be much more self-sustainable and much more resilient economically during a long war.
So it sounds like World War III might be the longest of all the world wars. I mean, they both averaged 5 to 6 years basically, but it sounds like a World War III could last maybe 10, maybe, if, obviously one side doesn't just get stomped out.
World War II had large swaths of territory change hands faster than in World War I. But when both sides were evenly matched, when there was little surprise involved, then the front lines were also quite static. The Gulf Wars of 1991 and 2003 may lead some to think that future wars may be quick, but keep in mind the US coalition was hugely superior to its opponent.
Yeah, Gulf War and 2003 invasion of Iraq, it's like we're fighting Iraq. And it's a massive coalition fighting Iraq. This is not going to be the same situation.
Technology, morale, information and surveillance, and even in numbers where it mattered.
And Iraq was nothing to bat your eyes about. Remember, Iraq had a pretty big military at the time, but we were just overwhelmingly still more powerful. Iraq was a pretty strong regional power for the Middle East.
What about the Ukraine war? That's basically the most recent war there is. In the early period, Ukraine had more troops and managed some territorial successes. During most of 2023, both sides had similar numbers and the front lines hardly budged. And now that Ukraine is still falling behind in troop numbers, Russia is slowly taking advantage of that. Numbers matter in world wars, not just people, but the size of economies. And with the size of economies
look at how much Russia contributes. Almost nothing. That's crazy. Wow, it's literally just held up by China right now.
The next world war, it seems likely we are looking at a very, very protracted world war, unlike anything we saw before. One way to shorten it might be nuclear weapons, but that's a route no one sane wants to take.
No one sane wants to take, yeah. I agree. I wish we would have talked a little bit more about some of the other allies that might join in, because these numbers do not include Japan, who has a very strong economy, Australia, South Korea, like I said, Taiwan. Those all contribute a little bit. I wish, I'm glad we included Belarus, because obviously Belarus is going to join in on the Russian side. But there's more. I don't think it would just be, NATO versus, in this map is essentially just showing NATO versus Russia and China. You have to include the Pacific powers. He did make a mention of that, but the map is not including that, and all these figures are not including the Pacific powers or the oceanic powers, Australia, New Zealand, and who knows where India is going to fall in the whole thing. I think India is mostly going to stay neutral. That typically is what India does. Iran will join in on the red team, but we'll see how much Iran, they're going to need to probably just straight up invade Central Asia so they can protect their ally, Iran, who's kind of isolated on an island out here by themselves. But this video makes me think, it really sounds like a World War III scenario would be very grueling. Well, assuming we don't use nukes, it'd be very slow and grueling. And it doesn't sound like there would be all that much progress being made. It would probably be a very tough battle, and it would take the course of years, basically. And I don't think anyone wants that. I do wish there was more of a mention for drones, the cheap drones that are happening, because that is, like I said, it seems like that's the biggest new technology that how World War III is going to be affected by those cheap drones, basically. If you read this comment, go back. This section has way too many terrible takes. That's so funny. Nope, we're going in. Put on the gas masks. Put on whatever masks you need. The air war analysis is extremely poor. SpaceX massively dominates space. That would be decisive. World War III depends on who can win the production drones. My dear armchair geopolitics, your deal is so cool and interesting, really, but let's all together hope to war never happens. Yes. Yeah, war is a horrible thing. Now, let's keep in mind these comments, and everyone watching this video, and the video that I'm looking at right here, they're more than likely coming from Europe and America and North America. So the comments are in English. There's going to be very few Russian takes, and obviously China's got their little firewall or whatever. So all these, they're going to be heavily Western Westernly biased. We do need to keep that in mind when it comes to analysis of a World War III scenario. World War III would not just be China, Russia. Pakistan, Iran, North Korea will try to take their sides of the pie. So India, Israel, Saudi Arabia will be on the other side. I wouldn't guarantee that Pakistan and India would get involved. That's the one thing. That would make it a true world war, though. That would be terrifying if India and Pakistan got involved. But Iran and North Korea, yes. And if North Korea is involved and South Korea is involved, I don't know if Saudi Arabia would definitely get involved. That's tough to say. Isn't World War III already happening in this comment section? Tank are kind of useless in today's wars. No. Another serious factor to consider is the real risk of insurgencies and general civil breakdown in Western European countries in the event of total war. Oh my goodness. And then what the freak is going over this region? Sam Gap, Harm would like to know your position. There's just no way there's no way we can properly analyze a World War III unless a World War III actually happens. I feel like if we were to do analysis of a Russian-Ukrainian invasion, of a Russian invasion of Ukraine back in 2021 or 2020 or 2019, I mean, there already was plenty of videos. Go back and look at the videos. Like after the Crimean War of 2014, that interwar period between when Russia took Crimea over and when Russia actually invaded again Ukraine in 2022. The takes are totally off. They're a complete mess because we just weren't able to know. We didn't know what was going to be, that drones were going to be such a big deal. We didn't. Who could have guessed it was going to be a World War I type trench warfare scenario happening in Ukraine and Russia? So unfortunately, all of our takes, we just don't know what would actually happen. And to be quite honest, I hope it stays like that. I don't want to know what a World War III actually looks like, but thanks for watching. Go to subscribe to this channel. And here's a big thank you to this month's patrons. Can white people smell the rain? It's pronounced Tour de Sillas, Drew. DruuuWu Labubu. Conquered Bread. White Grape of the Pirates. Never change, Drew. Unless you want to. LuxembourgLover. Fredrik Tibblin. Pavlik. KingBearHaze. NordTyrol. LoreTrack. Name here. Nolan. Check the Patreon link down below in the description.